So Bashar al-Assad has left Syria after agreeing, according to reports, to hand over power peacefully to the quote-unquote rebels. Now we are seeing, despite Abu Muhammad al-Julani saying that this transition will be peaceful, there won't be any harm to institutions, we see that these extremists are looting the presidential palace, the country, their central bank. We are seeing chaos on the streets of Syria. I wanted to ask about your understanding of what's going on, not just in Syria, but also with Bashar al-Assad. Given this really difficult situation right now for Syria, what do you make of it, and how do you understand and see this new unfolding reality?
My understanding is that he is in Moscow. That's what I've been told. And since there's no evidence of any plane falling in Lebanon or Syria, we haven't seen any footage or any footage of any remains of an aircraft. I assume that's just incorrect information. But of course, I don't have any proof. But I've been told that he's in Moscow. And again, when Lebanon is not a big country. If there was an airplane crash, I think by now we would have known. But it is a tragedy, and Mr. Erdogan stabbed the resistance in the back. He stabbed people of Palestine in the back, and we will see how this harms the Palestinian cause in the coming weeks and months. As we speak, the Israeli regime is advancing further inside Syria. I have no doubt that these al-Qaeda forces will do nothing about it. The Israeli regime is bombing major parts, major places, significant and important strategic places across Syria. And Erdogan has said nothing about it, nor has Jolani and his terrorists. They're saying nothing. They're busy doing what we saw in Baghdad when Saddam Hussein was overthrown. Those who are older recall that when Americans took Baghdad, we saw the city looted and everything stolen. And now we're seeing the central bank being emptied. We see people being shot at on the streets, people driving in their cars. We see buildings being looted, ministries being looted. And of course, these terrorists are al-Qaeda. There's nothing other to expect from these people who've been beheading others and burning people alive and beheading children, they and their affiliates and their allies. There's no reason to expect that such people can be reformed. And of course, they have many thousands of foreign fighters, almost some say up to 5,000 Chinese fighters. This is going to be a major issue for China. Erdogan has created a multinational terrorist organization, which includes large numbers of Uzbeks from Tajikistan and from other countries. So, and I'm sure that this is what the Americans want, because the Americans would love to see security in Central Asia and West Asia and East Asia disrupted. Mr. Erdogan supporters say Bashar Assad is a horrible person who killed hundreds of thousands of his own people. My response would be that if he's such a horrible person, then why did Mr. Erdogan, after a decade of dirty war, why did he want to mend fences with President Assad? Why did he want to reestablish ties and reestablish a relationship? If those are his principles, then why did he turn around and want to build a friendship with Syria under President Assad? And then if he wants to have wanted to have a decent relationship with Assad, then why did he turn around again and invade the country? So there are no principles here. And we all know that the person more responsible for the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of Syrians is Erdogan. True, it was an American dirty war. True that the Americans launched this dirty war And it began far before the planning before 2011. But we know from February the 12th, 2012, Jake Sullivan said al-Qaeda is on our side. A decade after 9/11. A decade after 9/11. And also we know that uh, the operation that the United States was carrying out, was that from the very beginning was when they started bringing in weapons from Libya. And also they used the same al-Qaeda forces in Libya. Then when they overthrew the government in Libya, and now look at Libya, they sent those weapons to Syria and they began the dirty war there. They helped create ISIS. And remember, Jolani was in ISIS. And he was the head of the Nusra Front, which was created by ISIS. Back then, ISIS was the Islamic State of Iraq. They created the Nusra Front for Syria. So he was al-Qaeda, ISIS. Back then, ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq was al-Qaeda. Then, when they broke away, not for ideological reasons, but because of the fact that he wanted to be in charge of Syria on his own, and he did not want to be under the authority of Abu Bakr Baghdadi. And al-Qaeda Central sided with him when he split from ISIS. Al-Qaeda sided with him. And that's why ISIS broke away from al-Qaeda, because of Jolani. So then Jolani, he carried out this campaign, this dirty war in Syria. And the West funded him. Countries in the Persian Gulf, oil and gas-rich countries funded him. Turkey supported him. And tens of thousands of foreign fighters were brought into Syria by Western intelligence agencies and the Turkish intelligence agency. And these people joined al-Qaeda and ISIS and their affiliates. So this is obviously a catastrophe for Syria. And Mr. Erdogan is the first and foremost person responsible for this catastrophe. He is the person responsible for this. And I do remember late in 2011, Alistair Crook, who was based in Pakistan in the 1980s, he told me that this is a dirty war in late 2011. And he explained to me that the same people who are in Pakistan and running the war in Afghanistan are now in Istanbul. He told me this in late 2011. He knew them. So instead of saying Assad killed hundreds of thousands of Syrians, it's the Americans, it's the Israelis, it's the country, it's the regimes and the dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region. But first and foremost, and it's Jordan, the Jordanian regime, but first and foremost, it's Mr. Erdogan. And I see dark days ahead for Syria. Al-Qaeda is not going to be able to rule over Syria. When they were in Idlib, they were constantly at each other's throats. And even if Jolani, under orders from Western and Turkish intelligence agencies, tries to behave or pretend to be more moderate, do people think that the people under his authority are going to change their ideology for him or for anyone else? So I think we're going to see a lot of, after the euphoria ends, for these terrorists, we're going to see hardship in Syria. It's going to get worse, and Syria is going to be the land where terrorists are exported to other parts of the world. So it's not just a threat to West Asia, it's a threat to the whole of Asia. And this is something that the Americans want. Of course, this is bad news for the West. But the United States and the Europeans have always been willing to sacrifice their own interests for the sake of Israel. This benefits two people, Erdogan and Netanyahu. And we saw Netanyahu's statements today in the occupied Golan.
This collapse is a direct result of our forceful action against Hezbollah and Iran, Assad's main supporters. It set off a chain reaction of all those who want to free themselves from this tyranny and its suppression.
We see that he said that our weakening of Hezbollah helped bring this about. So he fought Hezbollah, Of course, the Israelis were also weakened, but Hezbollah was weakened. And then he said that we need the ceasefire to deal with the so-called Iranian threat. And then as soon as the ceasefire happened, we saw the invasion of Syria.
Professor Marandi, I just wanted to ask you about what transpired. This occurred over the course of 10 days. And in the lead up to Bashar al-Assad leaving Syria and handing over the government, there was very little fighting happening in the lead up to this, a lot of retreating, a lot of standing down. Does this indicate some kind of a deal? What do you think happened here in terms of how this transpired? Because I agree, this definitely seems like a Libya 2.0 situation. But at the same time, the circumstances and how it went down so fast, so rapidly, and in the end, while there was fighting, especially in the beginning, in the end, seemed like the fighting ended up getting less and less and into essentially just standing down. What do you say about what happened?
My personal view is that a lot of people were bought off over the years by Western intelligence agencies, the Israeli intelligence, and Erdogan's intelligence. And also, in addition to that, Syria has been wrecked. Many people in Iran were worried about such a day, of such days, because a general in the army of Syria, his salary is $40 a month, and the salary of these terrorists go up to $2,000 a month. So, and Syria, because of the maximum pressure sanctions, its economy has been crushed. The Americans have occupied the northeastern part of the country. They're stealing the oil. They're stealing the agricultural products of the country, the grains, because that's where the heartland of agriculture. And they're exporting them, and they're strangling the Syrian people. So the Syrian economy has been in a downward spiral for years. People are extremely impoverished, and the country's broken. Sort of like what's happening in Cuba. Very similar to what's happening in Cuba. So the West tries to create desperation, and then you have the Israelis constantly bombing Syria, the Turkish regime using its terrorists, and the Americans bombing the East and using ISIS and its proxies in northeastern Syria. Also, President Assad, there's another issue too, and that is that President Assad did distance himself from Iran for the last 3-4 years to a degree. He did facilitate Iran's support for the resistance in the West Bank and in Lebanon. There's no doubt about that. But he did distance himself from Iran. And that was during his rapprochement with the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, which, as we saw, had no impact in the last 10 days. And another thing is that Iran was prepared to go to Syria to fight against al-Qaeda. They sent troops in over the last few days. But there were two things. One, the advance was very swift, but still Iran was prepared. But President Assad changed his position in the last few days a couple of times. And unless President Assad says he wants the Iranians, and the army works with the Iranians, Iran cannot just send troops to fight someone else's war. There has to be coordination, there has to be support, there has to be acceptance, and there has to be cooperation with the army. So at one point, President Assad said, I'm stepping down. On another occasion, he said, I'm going to stand in 2 separate meetings with, I don't want to go into detail, but I don't blame him, although I think that wasn't good, but I assume he was under extraordinary pressure, getting different messages from different people. But the Iranians were prepared. They brought in a significant number of people. Even though the Iranians were not, it takes time to bring in people and mobilize your resources, and it's expensive, but they did bring in an advanced party. They were prepared to move, but then President Assad shifted his position and shifted back. In any case, and there wasn't really time. Each hour that passed by made the situation worse. I don't blame him, and it's easy to blame people after the events happen. There's really very little time in the time of crisis. But Iran cannot fight instead of the Syrian army. That won't work. It'll be seen as an occupying force. And remember, Iran's, and just as a reminder to your viewers, Iran did not enter Syria until 2013, 2 years after the dirty war started. Neither did Hezbollah. It was only after tens of thousands of foreign fighters had already come into Syria and were a part of ISIS and al-Qaeda that Iran and Hezbollah entered because of those foreign fighters. So Iran only fought in Syria and Hezbollah and the others because Western intelligence agencies, Erdogan and others were bringing in these madmen, these crazy fanatics. And Iran was prepared again to fight against al-Qaeda because it's a security threat for the region. This will not end well. What Erdogan did to Syria will not end well for Turkey. It will not end well for the region. It will not end well for the world. It's made the world a more dangerous place. But two people benefit. One is Erdogan as a person, the person Erdogan, and Netanyahu. But Turkey will not benefit. Turkey has empowered al-Qaeda to its south, and it has wrecked the country. There, it's going to be a burden for Turkey. But I think Erdogan cares more about Erdogan than he does about Turkey. And his supporters, I think they're just emotional, and they are not objective. And Netanyahu, he too, is thinking more about himself. I think in the long run, this will not benefit anyone in the world, because there's potential now for instability in countries across the region. I mean, just as an example, Mohammed bin Salman, he's gone down the road of westernization. He's bringing in dancers and women half nude on stages in front of crowds. He's not Malik Abdullah, who presented himself as the supporter of Wahhabism and Salafism. So many of these Salafists and Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia, they're going to be encouraged. So this is not going to end well. And I think countries like China are going to be deeply concerned. There's already evidence that the Chinese are very upset about what Turkey's done. And of course, the Russians are going to move closer to Iran. This is not going to help Turkey. This is going to help Erdogan. He's going to be seen as, or present himself as, this neo-Ottoman emperor, and his brotherhood, or at least his faction of the brotherhood, is expanding their role. But this is not going to end well for anyone.